Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Stucky's Travels. Today we travel to Bonaire.
It's a small island country off the coast of Venezuela. You'll need your hepatitis A shot, your typhoid fever shot. Don't forget your passport, and away we go.
So Bonaire is one of the ABC islands off of Venezuela. ABC Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao.
The next slide will show a zoomed in version of the three islands. You can see that Bonaire is, well, they're all fairly small, but Bonaire is only 113 square miles. By comparison, Warren County, Indiana is 366 square miles, so almost three times the size of this island country with approximately 20,000 people. Aruba, by comparison, has over 100,000 people.
There's a very large national park up on the north end, but apparently it's fairly rugged driving through. So make sure you have a really nice 4x4 rental car if you're going to do it.
So one of the amazing things about Bonaire is that there's so many dives, but it's wall diving, which means that you can walk right off of the shore, go out until you drop down and find the wall, and then you can just go left or right, time yourself, give yourself more time to get back than you allowed to get out, and then you're there. So it's a neat way to explore the area.
As you'll notice, almost all of them are on the west side of the island. The east side, a lot of the diving isn't done just because of the currents. The currents will take you out into the ocean further, and that would be really bad.
The waves are also really large on that side by comparison, and it's very rocky, so it's quite dangerous. So the cool thing about this island is that there's a yellow rock with the name of the dive site. So you just load some tanks in the back of a rental truck, you drive to one of the yellow rocks on the side of the road, and that's where the dive is. And then there's all sorts of dive books that tell you exactly what you expect to find on that dive. So really, if you're doing anything besides scuba diving, you probably want to go to Aruba or Curacao, but Bonaire is perfectly set up for scuba, scuba, scuba.
Unless you're on a cruise ship, and the cruise ship does have about half the tourists each year for Bonaire.
You can also snorkel if you're taking time in between dives, but the diving is much better than the snorkeling. So most of the rest of the video is going to be identification of things that are living in the ocean in Bonaire.
So this is a French angelfish.
A queen angelfish.
On the right, you see the barber pole shrimp.
On the left is the squirrelfish.
On the far right, we have a trunkfish.
In the middle, we have the gray snapper, and on the left, we have the juvenile spotted drum.
Here on the left, you can see a nice sized lobster.
In the middle, you have a blue lined grunt, and then in the upper right hand corner, a bat-winged coral crab, and then just some colorful coral in the bottom right.
Yeah, and in the middle with the grunt, kind of sharing camera space with it, is a juvenile of the angelfish that we showed you earlier.
The juvenile looks much different than the adult. On the left, we have the Creole wrasse. They traveled every day. They migrated. When we would go out in the morning, we'd see all of them traveling in groups one direction. In the evening, we would see them all traveling the other direction.
And there'd just be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them in just massive long lines. And then we have a nice squid on the right.
On the left, we have the scrolled filefish.
And another nice picture of the squid.
That squid picture almost looks surreal, but there's no altering to that picture. That's really what the picture looked like. On the left, we have sea anemones.
And then on the right, the peacock flounder. Blends in very well.
On the left, we have a spotted moray eel.
And then on the right, the stonefish. The stonefish is one of the most venomous creatures in the sea. Its barb can kill you and can even stop your heart if it's not treated very, very quickly.
This is the hawk-billed turtle. nose and mouth are shaped the way that they are so that it can get into the coral reef and eat the sponges.
In this picture, we have the arrow crab, thus the arrow.
They were really tiny and blended in, but we saw them everywhere. Look more like a daddy long leg spider, if you ask me.
Also, the lizard fish right next to it.
The next picture probably is a trunk fish. In a previous slide, there was one that looked very similar to this. It's kind of hard to tell the difference between a box fish, a trunk fish, and a cowfish. The cowfish has like little horns, which is the way to tell them apart, but a trunk fish and box fish do look similar.
Here we have the spotted eagle ray, and the spotted eagle ray kind of moves its flaps or wings, as you will, kind of like a bird, and moves just like an eagle, which is why it's called that. It's got a really long tail, and these things are very large, not like a little tiny ray that you might accidentally step on.
See the grunt fish on the right that school together in large groups?
And then on the left, there's a sea anemone.
We have a few different types of fish on the right-hand side. We have the goatfish, the kind of the bottom two that have little whiskers. And then above that, we have the yellow-tailed snapper, and then we have the blue lined grunt.
Yep. And then on the left, one of many types of sea urchins that we saw along the way.
This is another urchin. This one just has smaller spikes.
Yep. And some brain coral, because it looks like brain. Here we have a sleeping stoplight parrotfish on the left.
And another scrawled filefish on the right.
Interesting fact about the stoplight parrotfish, this is a male, and all stoplight parrotfish start off female and look very different, which we'll see later on. As they age, they become a male, and they change color to this. Here on the right, you'll see a trumpet fish, and the trumpet fish, notice how they kind of swim vertically. And a lot of that is for both catching small prey by looking and blending in, looking like the surrounding area, but also by blending in, it keeps them from being eaten by predators.
And on the left, we have a flamingo-tongued nudibranch. It's actually eating the coral. It is a carnivore. You can see the bottom part of the coral looks different than the top part. It's actually eating off the living, active part of the coral.
Here on the left, well, here in all three pictures, we have a bunch of different types of eels. On the far left, they're actually called grass eel. They're really, really tiny. They look like little worms with eyeballs when they pop out, but if you get too close, they actually pull down into the sand. So this is about the best picture we could get.
In the middle, we have the spotted moray eel, and on the right, we have the sharp-tailed eel. The sharp-tailed eel spends more time fully swimming out, whereas the morays typically find a spot in a crevice to hide and wait for passing prey.
All right. Here on the left, we have a doctorfish.
And on the right, this just depicts how many different types of coral you can see in one area, or sponge. Like there's an orange sponge, but also several different types of coral all within one growing space.
Here we have a bunch of different blue tangs.
Also, there's the female stoplight parrotfish that Miles was talking about earlier with the red, black, and white on the same fish. It's amazing to think that that turns into a bright green colored fish later in its life. There's several different types of puffer type fish that expand whenever they're alarmed by predators. We believe this one was a balloon fish and that this one was a blowfish.
Here you can see us down near a shipwreck, and again, we're not certified to go in ships, but in order to get certified, you have to go through a class, and you can actually go into the ships and see the different fish inside. But there's a lot of growth on top of this ship, and that's really what we were looking at.
So these are herring. On the left is a zoomed in picture so you can see what the fish looks like. But these are the ones like on Finding Nemo that are like changing shapes into different forms. And they really truly did that. And on the right you can see how they're clustered into a group. and you could swim amongst that cluster, and they would dart and swim together in different patterns. It was really cool to see close up.
Here again, brain coral on the left.
We have the blue parrotfish in the middle and the banded butterfly fish on the right.
Here on the left is the chain moray eel.
In the middle is the four-eyed butterfly fish, and on the right, one of the many types of sponge. This is called a stovepipe sponge.
On the left, we have a nurse shark.
And on the right, we have a tarpon. Miles, would you like to tell them the story about the night dive?
So if you're ever going on your first night dive in this area, you take a flashlight and something bumps you and is the size of a shark and looks like a shark a little bit, hopefully it's not a shark, it's probably a tarpon. So when that happened, Michelle saw my flashlight go up and down really fast and thought it was funny.
It was funny. So as I described earlier, you get a rental truck as part of your stay at the hotel, and you throw your tanks in there and all your gear, and off you go to your different dive sites along the shore. On the right, we have a cowfish. As described earlier, the cowfish, boxfish, and trunkfish look similar. The cowfish actually has little tiny horns on the front.
And here you can see just the nice view that we had every day. Beautiful oceans. This part of the island was where a lot of people learned to actually
Windsurf.
Yep.
Again, just really blue crystal water, an old wooden boat that locals actually still use. A pelican.
So here we have the salt pans, and these are actually solar salt pans where they dehydrate the water to the salt water to get these massive mounds of salt. I think that the mounds are 50 feet tall and have something like 200 metric tons of salt in each mound.
And they bag that salt up and sell it to different countries. You can see part of the processing plant that they use to help with loading up and shipping off the salt. So in those salt pans that Miles was referring to, as the water's evaporating away, it changes the salinity of the water. So as the water's going away, it's the fresh water that's evaporating and the salty water gets left behind. As more salt water gets left behind, it allows for, it's a very briny solution, and it allows for a microorganism to grow that has a pink colored cell membrane. It's a single celled organism, and so that's why the water is colored pink.
So these are kind of markers for the slave huts. And in the 1850s, the slave huts were actually built, and they had the white slave huts and the red slave huts based on which salt pans the slaves were working at. They're built for 2 men, but actually a lot of times 6 men slept in them.
Before those were built, though, they just slept outside. So the nighttime winds and things like that, it was nice for them to have some shelter at least. There were some flamingos.
And some waves.
Big waves. More big waves. There's some people practicing their windsurfing.
And we saw a lot of different types of lizards. We have an iguana on the right.
And a whip-tailed, blue whip-tailed lizard on the left.
And there's certain types of whiptails that are all female. And basically inside their reproductive system, they mix their chromosomes to get female babies.
We did venture up to the national park area very carefully with our rental truck, and when we were up there, we saw some wild mules amongst the cactuses. Some nice churches along the way. Again, it's a very small island, and that's the flag. So, one last thing to talk about with Bonaire is at first they got their electricity through diesel. That's a very expensive way of getting electricity for an entire island. But in 2004, the diesel plant caught on fire, and they were using backup generators for several years until they finally converted to mostly renewable energy of wind. And so now, on a nice windy day, 90% of the island's electricity comes from wind energy. On average, 45% of their energy per year. They also make their own drinking water by purifying the water. So very resourceful Welcome to Bonaire. Enjoy your time there.
Thanks.